Ashlee, welcome so much to the podcast. I have been wanting to have you on for a while now. You've been one of my kind of like top of my list to have on the podcast. I'm so happy we finally managed to like make this work. For everyone listening, I would love you to kind of introduce yourself, let people know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tally, for having me on. I know it's been quite a journey to get here, but I think all of these things work in, right timing. So I'm Ashlee Bennett. I'm a body image therapist based in Melbourne, Australia, and I do art therapy and counselling, just general talk counselling. And I think we'll talk a little bit about art therapy a bit later on. I'm quite prolific on social media. I have a lot of thoughts, and it's been, a pretty helpful outlet for me to communicate that for my own healing and also as education for other people. So that's me.
You're one of my favorite people to follow, and everyone should immediately go follow it at body image, I think underscore therapist. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can tell because I tag you all the time because I think like literally every other day there's a quote on there and I'm like something to do with body image and I'm just, yeah, love it. Like that speaks so much. So I get so much from your work. So I really appreciate what you do. Um,
Yeah, you're welcome.
you mentioned you're an art therapist and you also say in your kind of bio, you do body image work, internalized fat phobia, trauma, embodiment, pleasure, and recovery. And I'm just curious how you came to work in that space and kind of what brought you there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a journey. So I think I'll begin just a bit more generally in that I identify as a wounded healer. And I think that's a Jungian term. So you would find that a number of therapists become therapists because they've been through their own experiences. And something that I was noticing throughout, my recovery process of just, my evolution as a human is that when it came to body image, we weren't really talking about it in the context of weight stigma or fat phobia. It was always within quite a weight-centric diet culture conversation. And the body image work that we would hear a lot about was for people who were already in smaller bodies. So it was almost like convincing them that, no, you're not fat, you're okay. And there's a lot of reassurance in that. But what I was noticing is that we weren't talking about weight stigma and fat phobia. And a part of what really propelled me into this was after my master's, I started a research degree and I was looking at internalized weight stigma, and we can maybe unpack some of those terms a little bit later on in my thesis. So I was coming across all of this information that I remember reading some of these papers and literally just fist pumping in the air, thinking, what the heck, where has this information been all my life? So I knew I needed to go down that path and really specialize in it. And it's become such a needed area. People think, oh, body image, it's just for teenagers, but it actually requires quite a specialization, I think.
And when I'm talking about, in the context of like this wider conversation, when I'm talking about intuitive movement, intuitive eating, all these things, so much of, I think, the piece of the puzzle that kind of holds people back from fully embracing these ideas and these approaches is the impact it will have on their bodies and therefore how that will change their body image. So I agree that I think body image is so important in terms of like it needs to be as much of a part of this conversation and as much as and a huge part of this healing work when we're talking about our relationships with food and exercise as well, that we can't just ignore it. So you mentioned the terms weight stigma, weight centric. I would love you to just kind of break those down for people listening, because I think you and I kind of have a good understanding of that. But how do you define those?
Yeah. So weight centric is a name for a paradigm. So it's a particular paradigm that focuses on body weight as a measure of health and as a measure of success as well. So we're looking at things like diets and any kind of regime, like exercise regime, that's trying to focus on really changing someone's body weight. That's what I mean by weight centric. So it's very focused on weight as a measure of success. Weight stigma is really common within the weight centric paradigm. So it is based on fat stereotypes. So, and that's the thing, weight stigma can go on either end. It's basically if you fall outside of the range of what we see as socially acceptable, there can be a stigma attached to that. So on the plus size, bigger body side of the spectrum, you'll have fat stereotypes like, oh, that person's just really lazy, or they're unhygienic. I've heard so many, it's wild. They're stupid, they're unmotivated, they lack control, that they're not trustworthy. There's been so many, I think I read a research paper saying that people in larger bodies are more likely to be found guilty in a court of law because of those stereotypes. And then on the other side of the equation, you might have someone who's at a lower body weight, and you hear people say like, oh, eat a cheeseburger, and you mustn't eat, she just needs a good steak or something like that. So weight stigma can be on both sides, but we most often see it in the higher end of the weight spectrum.
Yeah, and I'd wonder on your thoughts in terms of differentiating, or because I know that some people kind of use the term weight stigma when talking about fat phobia. And I don't know if you think this, and I would just love to hear your thoughts on this, just maybe from just my education purposes, that I think some people say that like weight stigma is maybe like the nice, polite way of saying fat phobia. And it's more of like the research academic term, and what it is it is essentially talking about fat phobia. And perhaps you want to explain how they're connected, how they may be different.
So in the research, there isn't I noticed just through going through the research that there isn't a single definition of weight stigma, that some people refer to weight stigma as sitting on either side of the spectrum. So whether it's, really low body weight or higher body weight, if you sit outside of that range, that's weight stigma. And some research papers do talk about the lower body weight, but what they don't talk about, some of them touch on it, is that it is still more socially acceptable to be on the lower end of the body weight spectrum. And I know some people out there will be like, that's rubbish, because I get yelled at in my car, and I've definitely heard stories on that end too. But yeah, it's very much a research term, and weight stigma can be used by people just to, be a little bit more watered down and not freak people out over the word fat that is contained in fat phobia. And I suppose as a preface, throughout this talk, I might use the word fat as a descriptor. And just so people know, it's a neutral descriptor. Everyone has baggage around that word to some extent, but the way that I use it, it's just an identifier for a body type. But yeah, that's something you can explore yourself.
Awesome. I think that's really helpful to kind of hear those different takes on it. We've touched on it before on this podcast about the work of kind of unpacking body image and getting to a good place with it. And I wondered on your kind of professional thoughts as a therapist working in this space, whether you think it's something where body image can often be a symptom, like poor body image could be a symptom of deeper issues and underlying or past trauma and issues that have kind of bubbled up to the surface through body image concerns, and whether you think that to deal with that, whether we like do the body image work to then have the kind of resilience to unpack the deeper underlying issues, or do we do the deeper work and head into therapy and work on that stuff, and then the body image stuff will get better? I just wondered if you think there's like a set approach to that, and whether you what you would recommend professionally.
So it's different for all people. I've found that I would say a good 95% of the people that I've worked with over my time um, have other issues that have fueled their body image issues. It's pretty rare that body image issues just exist in a vacuum. There are some people who are like, no, I just really need to unpack, my relationship with my body because I've been told by society, rah, rah, rah. And that's as far as they want to go. But often I refer to body image issues as like the canary in the coal mine. I think sometimes the only way we can say that there's something wrong is by saying, I don't like my body. So some people think, they come in and say, I hate my body, I can't deal with it, rah, rah, rah. And then when we get down to it, we find issues around trauma and low self-esteem and low self-worth. And yeah, sometimes we have to do that work kind of in tandem because some people, they don't really want to hear that, there might be something deeper fueling it because it's hard to go there, and I have complete respect for that. So sometimes it's about jumping back and forth a little bit. So you'll be doing some of that more surface body image work, and then you'll dip into something a bit deeper and make a link and bring it back. So it's almost like a little bit of a dance in a way. There's a bit of an art to it.
Yeah, I found like in my own experience, like early 20s had like issues with food and exercise and
Mm.
body image that kind of all came together, and it was a very disordered relationship. And just kind of how the progression I've gone, I've kind of like worked on that and got to a good place with how I felt about food and exercise, and kind of body image as well. But I have found that now I've kind of like, it's almost like now that's kind of not distracting me, like like
Mm.
having to like obsess over what I'm eating and obsess over exercise. Now that's not distracting me so much. I'm able to kind of get deeper into the issues and go
Yeah.
to therapy and actually be like, and also make links that like 10 years later I'm like, oh, that's why I was needing to control food and exercise. Like
Yeah.
joining the
Yeah.
dots, like for me, I found that really that's been really powerful in kind of my own healing, because like to understand why I behaved the way I behaved and realize that um this was my coping mechanism to an extent. And so yeah, just in a kind of personal way, when I do find that body image stuff pops up, and I think in lockdown and of this pandemic, like that certainly happened at different
Yeah.
moments. And I think that's been when other things have been hard as well. And I've noticed that there's like, whether it's a direct cause or whether it's correlates with me kind of needing to like think about like deep issues, or old grief coming to the surface, and that comes
Mhm.
out in me feeling uncomfortable in my skin and uncomfortable in my body. And yeah, I wondered if you've kind of maybe noticed that, particularly during this pandemic, that like
Mm.
things people have found it like like it's been, from I don't know, but I'm sure from like your messages you're getting even just through social media alone, it's been tough
Mm.
for people.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, it is sort of in those lull periods where things bubble up to the surface, and even people who, are dealing with other aspects of mental health and not body image, things are coming up to the surface. It's almost like life has settled. I sort of see it like a snow globe, when we're going through life, it's all shook up, and then it starts simmering down, and then you start noticing all of these things in your landscape. It's like, oh, that was hidden before. I'm not into it.
Yes, I didn't
Yeah.
want to see it before. I did. That's the whole point. I was trying to keep everything busy so I
Yeah.
didn't have to see it.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that analogy. That's
Yeah. Yeah. And it's what you were saying before. It's actually really common too for I see some people who they went through eating disorder recovery or had really intense experiences with their body image, body dysmorphia when they were a teenager. And it hasn't been until their late 20s, mid to late early 30s, where they're like, hey, actually, I want to deal with the underlying issues. Um, so that's really common too. And I think we have to really honor, just, for professionals in general, I think that's something we hold, I hope that we hold, is that the body image journey is something that reveals itself over time. So when you think about it in your early 20s, it's actually quite hard to work on your body image stuff because it's such a topic. Like
Mm,
it's such a topic. We live in this image obsessed society, and we think, well, if I work on my body image issues, I'm going to stop caring about how I look, and then all my friends are going to leave me, and I won't find a partner, and all of that. And they're really valid concerns. So I think it's really normal for us to go through periods of time where, you know, new things pop up, whether it's, you know, prior to this pandemic, or you're coming into a period of isolation where you're seeing some of those snowflakes come down and things are popping up for you.
yeah, I think that's really interesting because I wonder if you've wonder whether the research says or whether it's been like in your kind of professional experience to notice that a lot of issues around body and food and things like that happen in our early 20s, like teens and early 20s.
Mm,
Maybe is that a time when we are most vulnerable to those kind of thought
yeah.
patterns and you know feeling that pressure, like you said, from society? Because yeah, that totally resonates with me.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of the research and the way that they frame body image, we look for where those times of vulnerability are. So times of vulnerability are normally times of transition. So it's when you're, you know, moving into puberty. Maybe you've become pregnant and your body's changing, or you've had, you know, a really traumatic experience happen at some point, or going through menopause or a relationship breakup, things like that. So times of transition when there's actually a lot of change, especially when it involves your body, illness is another one of them, can sort of destabilize your sense of your body. So you become more vulnerable to that. And I think, you know, going through our teenage years, it's difficult in a lot of ways, and I'm really glad I'm not there anymore. I don't think many of us want to go back to our teenage years, but it's such a time of transition, and we are vulnerable because we're also going through that developmental stage where we're starting to form social peer-based relationships, and we want to fit in, and we're trying to understand where we fit in the world and our sense of self and identity. And it's just a, you know, I clap anyone who makes it out of their teen years with, yeah, with some sort of stability. But yeah, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, sometimes I feel old when I say this, like, but with social media these days,
Yeah.
I think like that. I mean, it was bad enough being a teen, like in the early 2000s. I can't
Mm,
imagine, and you know, we started to have phones and stuff. We did have phones, but we didn't have social media
mm,
in the way that we do now. Like, not really. We had a bit of Facebook,
mm,
but I
mm.
can't imagine the additional pressure to kind of look a certain way and always present perfection online, and you know, things like photoshopping images and filters and all this stuff, setting
Yeah.
unrealistic beauty standards and body standards for people that they feel they have to live up to. Yeah, I think, and like as you said, I think maybe as you get older, you kind of are like, you can be like, I know that's a filter, I know that's been edited, and it can
Mm,
still have an effect. Like I absolutely think it can, even you know, as you get into your like late 20s, 30s, older. Um,
mm.
but yeah, I think growing up in a time when everything's always been filtered and everything's always been edited, it must be quite hard to know what is real and what's not, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, we have become more image saturated, and I haven't explored the research in comparison, the different times, but I almost think about how we don't know what we've missed out on in a sense. So for us to look back and think, oh, imagine being 15 and having Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and all of this stuff, how wild would that be? But then I think about how, you know, Gen Z, who's coming up, that's what they were, you know, that's what they have
That's what
lived
I
with.
know.
So I think about, you know, I wonder what kind of resilience they've built up to that, Because yeah, I think to be that person is like before social media,
Yeah.
we only really could compare ourselves to some model in a magazine if we happened to buy a magazine, or we would compare ourselves more to our friends. We couldn't just open up,
Mm.
Snapchat or open up something and have that direct, comparison moment.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and like I'm like on a lot of these platforms and like I'm on TikTok and things like that and like I love it, but um and I think like credit where credit's due. I think like yeah, Gen Z, they're very switched on and they have a lot of awareness, but like also I see a lot of normalizing of I think what can be um disordered behaviors of like feeling the pressure to like look a certain way and in the fitness space like exercising purely to change aesthetic and look like the girls that they all want to be like and look up to and yeah, it's a really interesting perspective and like I said it kind of does make me feel a bit old because I'm like, oh, I'm at the point now where I'm like, oh, look at the kids and the teens and um
Yeah.
how are they coping, and I do find it interesting, and I also maybe would love to like hear a little bit about body image in pregnancy actually, because I think
Mm,
that's not really discussed much.
no.
And I think I'm certainly at the age where I think where people around me are having children and or wanting to have children, and I think no one talks about how maybe difficult that can be on your body image and how you know your body's changing and you can't control it in the way that
Mm,
we've been told we can control other things. And yeah, I would just maybe love to hear a bit about your thoughts on that and how
yeah,
to
sure.
I know and how to kind of cope with that process.
Yeah, well, it's another really significant point of transition, and it's really dependent upon the unique factors people bring into that pregnancy. So where their body image was already at. So it's kind of, it's along a spectrum. I think everything's on a spectrum these days. That some people's body image actually improves in pregnancy because of the function of pregnancy. They feel that, oh, my body's actually doing something amazing and wild, and oh, wow. And that can be seen, I don't want to generalize too much, but I've heard that anecdotally for people who have been in larger bodies who have become pregnant, that it's actually improved their body image because, oh, this is something my body is able to do. It can do this, and it can almost make you feel connected in a way to your body. Whereas, say, people who have held, and this is, going to the other side of things, people who have placed a lot of worth into self-worth into their body, maybe they've never had a stretch mark in their life. I really don't know anyone who has
Yeah.
that. But there are some people who freak out for one stretch mark
Mm,
when they get that in pregnancy, and that's completely valid. Where they will, yeah, their pregnancy will plummet their body image because they've never had to experience such change
mm,
in their body. So it's thinking about, okay, um, if anything, I would probably, if you're thinking about getting pregnant, do some body image work beforehand, just to try and shift some of that investment in your body, just so you've got more freedom for it to change. So I'd be thinking about doing that beforehand instead of dealing with the changes throughout.
and yeah, I'd love to talk about like what that body image work is because we kind of use terms even on this podcast of kind of body neutrality, body
Mhm.
acceptance, body
Mhm.
confidence.
Yeah.
And I wondered, where do people start doing this body image work? Do you need to have a therapist specializing in this work? Can you do stuff on your own? And what's the avenue to go down? What is it like going for body neutrality? Is it the body acceptance stuff? Is
Yeah.
it like just loving yourself? Like what is it?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there's a
quite a
lot
few
of
options there.
buzzwords out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you can absolutely do some work on your own and you can do some work with a therapist. So in a way, we can use the plasticity of our brains to our advantage. So with body image, it's not all of it, but a lot of it can be informed by what we see, what we view. So you may have heard people talking about online, diversify your feed. Make sure you're viewing bodies of all shapes and sizes. And that actually does a lot of the work for you. When you start seeing bodies like yours reflected back at you, your brain just does the work. It's just like, oh, okay, my body is okay, it is accepted. Cool. And then you notice shifts, and I even noticed that in my own experience. Following people who had bodies like mine, and now I can look in the mirror and I'm like, yeah, I've seen this body before in a positive context, and it doesn't worry me. So you can definitely do that level of work, but I think people who have body image issues that are really caught up in trauma, and there might be eating disorders there and they're a bit more complex, you can do that and perhaps look at working with a therapist as well. But in terms of all of the buzzwords, I think even now, as people have listened to those words, body neutrality, body love, body acceptance, what resonates with you? For some people, they want to jump right in the deep end and they're like, yes, I'm going to strip off and pose in a bikini and get my rolls out. And it's like a really radical act. And I think that's definitely a personality style. And for some people, they sit with so much shame around their body that they couldn't even begin to think about loving what they see or showing their body to the world. So I think starting somewhere like body neutrality, where you're just sort of accepting that your body is, it's just your body just exists. And I don't know if I'm getting too ahead of myself. I almost see body neutrality sitting at the start and then also at the end of someone's body image journey. So you'll start with body neutrality and you'll go up maybe to this celebratory, almost like exhibitionist kind of behavior, which is wonderful. And then you start coming down the other end and you're like, yeah, I'm pretty okay with my body and I actually want to focus on other things. And you get back to that point of, yeah, my body just is simple.
I do you know what I totally agree actually, and I think for me some of the work that like really resonates with me right now is Beauty Redefined stuff, and we had them on the podcast
Yeah, they're
before,
incredible.
and that episode was extremely popular. I'm always getting feedback about it, and that their idea, and like they have their mantra, which is like your body is an instrument to be used, not an ornament to be looked
Yeah.
at. And I have to say it's a mantra I used a lot myself, just in those
Super.
times of like doubt. And in terms of like even social media, like you said, diversifying your feed and seeing different bodies. And I talk about in fitness, like seeing different bodies in motion, to see that like people in different shapes and sizes move their bodies, and there is a form of movement for you, and like no matter your body shape, like you can do this. But also, yeah, to kind of have that, even people like yourself and Beauty Redefined, to follow those as like reinforcing this kind of, I think, often reflection on how we like interact with our bodies and how we view bodies in general as well as our own. And I think like there's some really educational stuff out there as well that I mean, I would be interested in you because like I have found, like especially as I've like kind of dived into therapy, that like I've wanted to follow all the therapy accounts, anyone doing any of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And I know there was like a bit of a, there was a lot of chat, I think maybe it was earlier this year, I mean, who knows if it was this year or last year, I don't know, it's been an age, um around whether like following therapy accounts, like it's not a substitute for therapy, and shouldn't be. But
Mm.
I also think people are getting insights into concepts and ideas and understanding of maybe even just like a basic level of psychology that they just haven't had access to. I mean, I never had access to it, and I feel like I often read stuff on social media and I'm like I'm sure you've put up posts, and like I can't think of specifics, but I know that I would have read something that you've written and gone, I need to talk about that with my therapist, because that's like, lit
Yeah.
a bulb for me, and I need to explore that. And yeah, I wondered what you think about like the role of being a therapist online and how people can benefit from that.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of the work that therapists do on social media as psychoeducation.
Mm,
And for some therapy approaches, psychoeducation is a part of therapy as well. So what's missing is that actual individual therapeutic relationship, which makes it not therapy. But
mm,
it doesn't mean that the information that they're providing isn't therapeutic for someone.
mm,
So, psychoeducation, you've probably heard the term of knowledge is power in a lot of cases. I think when you can make sense a little bit of what you're experiencing, it can help you hold it a little bit more. It's not the whole story because then you can get caught up in really intellectualizing things and rationalizing, and I can certainly go there. I love analyzing things, but yeah, it's an aspect of it, and I think yeah, there's a difference between therapy, but we can't deny that it isn't therapeutic for someone.
mm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've personally gained so much from it, and I've really feel that whilst my journey of growth has been kind of my journey and stuff I've had to work on, it's only been a support. You know, it's been a really
Yeah.
positive support. Now, I wanted to talk about in this episode particularly, and we're talking a lot about so body image online. Is this the conversation right now around um, people sharing images of like Instagram versus reality, and often those images being shown by people in straight sized bodies. So when we use the term straight size, we mean people who aren't plus size and can shop in any store, kind of thing. Um, Doing these kind of Instagram v reality photos and getting a lot of traction and a lot of support. And often I think people feel like it's just thin people contorting their bodies to show rolls, to show cellulite, to and we had a whole episode about this with Rafaela Mancuso. So if you want to go back, and it's specifically about that kind of that take on body positivity. And I wanted to discuss it in the context of body image
Mm-hmm.
because I see, like, I was even kind of in the comments of a post last night, kind of having a discussion about this because I think it's really interesting that these posts are extremely popular, and you know, I see a lot of people finding this stuff really helpful. Similarly, like we've mentioned TikTok, I go on TikTok and I see um, a lot of objectively thin women putting out this kind of content, but people in the comments saying like, oh my goodness, this has helped me so much, I ate a meal today, or you know, I
Yeah.
this is helping me with my eating disorder, this is helping me in my recovery. And um so I personally do see value in that content, and I don't want to completely diminish the value of the content. But
Yeah.
my question to you is, do you think that the need, like, why do we need to share Instagram the reality shots? Why do we uh what is it about showing cellulite or showing our belly rolls that
Mm.
is such a radical act? Because I have certainly felt like I've posted what I felt to be extremely vulnerable images of myself in the past, um, because in that headspace that I was in, and even being smaller than I am now, I felt
Mhm.
like you know, I can look back at pictures now and think like, why did you think that? But like, I could have gone like, oh, I am not as lean as I once was, and the fact that I'm not, um, is a radical thing, and me sharing this is huge because I'm, you know, I hope I'm explaining this right, but I felt like
Yeah, you
you know,
are. Yeah.
I'm posting this content because I'm, you know, pushing the boundaries of like what is acceptable. Because in the, and I wonder maybe it's because the kind of content I was following was predominantly made of people in smaller bodies. And so to show a, a fat roll, to show, like for me, particularly working in fitness, to not have the six pack that I once did and show
Yeah.
that felt really radical because I didn't see that happening in a lot of the content I was following. And yeah, I just would love to talk about, is that partly to do with body dysmorphia? And what is body dysmorphia, I think is the question. Is this kind of phenomenon partly to do with a collective body dysmorphia in terms of what we view, how we view our own bodies and how we view other bodies, and therefore portraying our bodies in a supposedly, I'm using quote marks, unflattering light is a radical
Yeah.
act. And I hope I've explained that well.
Yeah, we can unpack it a little bit because there's a few
Mm,
concepts.
mm,
But when you talk about it being a radical act, what we're essentially talking about is people breaking the rules. And that feels really radical. It's breaking the rules. And we just need one person to break the rules to think, oh, I could break the rules too. So, yeah, there's quite a number of things, and I'll see if I can get around to them. Um, in terms of when you think about it, social endorsement is a concept where when you see other people doing something, it's endorsed for you. It's like, oh, other people are doing this, I can do it too. When we've just seen a very narrow, one particular body type shown in the media, even if it's a thin body, there's no rolls, there's no cellulite. On a level, when a thin person then starts showing rolls and cellulite, it's breaking that illusion essentially, and it's breaking the rules. And we're creating like another avenue for something to be socially endorsed. So, for example, like you said, you know, you read through the comments and you saw someone say, like, oh my God, thank you so much for showing your roll, even if it was one roll hunched over, because we don't see that in the media. We still don't see that, even though people are objectively thin and they might not deal with as much weight stigma as someone who's larger. Those images are serving a particular group of people. And on a therapeutic level, I think that's great, you know. What happens is when we zoom out again and we critique the way that we're raising awareness about body image and injustices in bodies, is that we look at it through a social justice lens and think, oh, but there's nothing wrong with your body. Like, why are you crying over a tiny piece of cellulite or a stretch mark or a roll? When over here, you've got people who are denied jobs and who are, you know, yelled at in the street and can't get medical care. So we look at that and think, what the heck? What's that all about?
like, what have you got to cry about? Like,
Yeah. And that's completely valid because over in this space, you know, there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of pain. And then and again, there's a lot of dialectics in this and a lot of things that can contradict one another. When you come back and look at it from a therapeutic lens, it's like, actually, we can't compare pain. In this sense, pain is relative. So if I'm sitting with someone who's in a smaller body and they're incredibly distressed about how their stomach has looked in a photo and there's basically a skin roll, I sit with that. You know, it's okay that they hold that. And, you know, someone who's sitting with systemic discrimination about their body size, I can sit with that as well. I don't think there's a role, I don't really see a purpose in, from a therapeutic perspective, to compare those pains. But I think when we zoom out and we look at it from a social justice, socio-political perspective, and I know these are a lot of buzzword terms, we can see that, okay, people over in smaller bodies, when they're showing a roll or them eating pizza, they aren't getting yelled at by people in the comments saying you're going to die young and you should go and burn in hell and like set yourself on fire. And I've heard incredible things that have been said to people in larger bodies. So what's being called out is that, and there's a great, I think her name is Danielle is Anxious. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where she's recreating viral images of people in smaller bodies who are posing very radically, like eating pizza or showing a roll, and she's doing it in her larger body just to show how each of those images are received in a very different way, where one is very moralized and it becomes about health and you're promoting obesity and rah, rah, and the other one gets claps and congratulations. So when we zoom out and view it from a social justice lens and we critique it, we're just trying to point out the hypocrisy and the injustice in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really kind of clear way of kind of like an overview of the different kind of perspectives on it. And I think people's perspectives are only going to be informed by their kind of lived experience and their, you know, like their past with their body and the and what they've been through. And you know, it's I think it's frustrating maybe on both sides to for people to think like you said, like what have you got to be upset about? If you're in a thin body, like the world treats you just fine. You don't know the half of it. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's the people that saying like my experiences have been valid in my smaller body, um and yeah, I would, yeah, I want to continue talking about this in the context of that body dysmorphia and
Mm-hmm.
the, like, you know, me posting in the past a body that I felt was, and um I would say this is like pre-discovering diet culture and understanding what fat phobia is. So with my, in the past, with my fat phobic thoughts, thinking, you know, I looked bigger, and obviously that, because of my experiences with fat phobia, like that was something that was deemed wrong for me, and you know, it felt extremely vulnerable to, yeah, to like just to post my body. And like I've looked back at images now. I'll scroll back, and maybe it was like 2 years ago, and I'll look back at things I've posted, and I'm like, as my body has got bigger since then, I'm kind of like, what, like, I understand what your brain thought, but like objectively, that is not what you look like. How you look like in your head, how you perceived your body to be in your head, um, like objectively now, with like all the kind of learning I've done, and also just how far I've come in general, like I'm like, you were fine. Like like there's never been a problem. There's never been, you know, there's like, I don't understand
Mm-hmm.
why you felt this way, but I also recognize the mindset I was in at that time. And like I said, the people I was following and the messaging that was constantly reinforced to me about what bodies were meant to look like, and the standard I felt I held myself to. Um, do you think that like Instagram perfection, and you know, that need for social media perfection, like is causing us to genuinely believe, like I think I'm particularly talking about people in smaller bodies here, genuinely believe that
Mm-hmm.
like we, it is radical, there is something like we shouldn't be having stretch marks, we shouldn't be having these
Mm.
things, and that acknowledging them like is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And when you think about it, the image that you're comparing to in your mind, most often has been an edited image. It's been a posed image. It's been, whether it was on, you know, TikTok or Instagram or in a magazine, it's been constructed in a particular way, and that's what we compare ourselves to. So, you know, the way that people get thigh gaps, you know, they just angle their hips back in a particular way, and people don't know that that's what's happening. Um, so I've just lost my train of thought.
Well, one thing I and I think maybe the conclusion I've kind of come to with this
Mhm.
kind of discussion and debate around this topic is, I think, and I was kind of discussing this on social media last night with a creator who kind of was grappling with the like idea of having thin privilege, so living in a smaller body, but also sharing content that is like so positively received, because it
Mhm.
does, like you said, it does break the rules for people who look
Yeah,
like her.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what I was going to touch on, is that for the everyday person who's just taking a photo on their iPhone, that lens, because they don't have all of that background of photography and how to pose a body, the way that they're seeing their body reflected back at them looks dramatically different to what they're actually seeing. So then there's an assumption that, oh, my body must actually be bigger. It must be bigger. It must be wrong or distorted. And the way that I sort of hold that is the way that we perceive our body in general is so unstable
Mm.
that we can't really rely too much on how we see our bodies. And I think that's what you mentioned, that collective, body dysmorphia. We're receiving feedback about our bodies from so many different sources, so many different lenses, and they all look different. So our brain is sitting there being like, what the heck is real? I don't know what's real. What does my body actually look like?
Mm.
So I think about when you're trying to work out, what does my body actually look like? What are you really asking? And what are you going to do with the information if you could know what it looks like as well?
Yes, I think that's really helpful, because I think that's when you get maybe a bit more of that objectivity in. And I think
Mm,
we spoke about before we started recording about an objective view and a subjective view. And
yeah.
is that what it is? Is that the subjective brain telling you what your body image is today, and then like 2 days
Yeah.
later, where nothing has objectively changed, but subjectively you feel
Yeah.
totally different about your body, and you're having a really bad day, and like
Yeah.
you don't feel the same.
Mm-mm. Yeah, we are subjective people.
Mm.
And this gets, if we really went down into it, it's a way of viewing the world, but everything is viewed through your lens. Like your consciousness only exists within you. It's subjective. And some people would say that, yeah, but you can have a bit of an objective sense. And I think we all do to an extent. We know objectively, even if we have a lot of subjectivity coming over, unless you've got really intense body dysmorphia, you do have a bit of a objective sense of your body to an extent. But for the most part, I think we're incredibly subjective. Depending on your mood, you can look in the mirror and see something completely different. You'll zoom in on a particular area and it will feel inflated. If you're feeling really great, you'll look in the mirror and be like, yes, bitch, like I'm on it, rah, rah.
Mm.
And you'll sort of gloss over your whole body and you'll see yourself beyond your body as well. So something I think about is, okay, if we're subjective viewers of our body, how can we sort of have flexibility to shift between all of those subjective lenses? And we do that through curiosity. There are some moments where I'll be in the mirror and maybe I'm really tired because, I'm a human too. Sometimes I have bad body image days and I'll notice myself critiquing and I'll be like, oh, isn't that really interesting? That's so
Mm.
interesting. Like, oh, I really hate my body right now. Fascinating. So I bring that curiosity into it just so I can detach from it a little bit because it's sort of like just watching a movie that's cropped up in a way.
Yeah.
And that's going to be different. It could be different in an hour. It could be different. You might take a selfie and think, oh no, I actually look really good. The main point is that you begin to notice all of the fluctuations between how you're subjectively viewing your body in the moment. And then you start to notice actually it's relatively unstable. It's not very consistent the way that I'm viewing it because what we know is if we were to objectively measure it, and some people do that, they try and weigh themselves daily, they'll measure, they'll check their arms and things like that, looking for some objectivity. But yeah, for the most part, it is, that sentence was going to be really gold at the end, and I just lost it.
Well,
Uh, yeah.
when you're talking about that like knowing that these thoughts are subjective, and is that the same as like, so I think it's Brené Brown talks about like the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah,
And is it the
exactly.
same thing, like the story I'm telling myself about my body today is XYZ, and a curiosity with that, like, where did that story come from? Why do I have that story? Like, how
Mm,
is this story impacting me?
how is
Rather than,
it benefiting me in this moment?
yeah, and like rather than saying like this is absolute truth, saying like this
Mm,
is a story, and you know, art, like I don't know, I wonder if that helps give a bit of like you said, that detachment.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like instead of having the movie, the story right up against your face and you can't really separate yourself from it, doing things like bringing in curiosity or being like, "Oh, is this the story I'm telling myself today?" Or just saying, "Oh, I notice I'm having the thought that my body really sucks." It sort of distanced the movie a little bit, and then you can sort of, let's say you're sitting in a movie theater and you know you're really immersed in the movie and you forget that there's, some kids making out up the back and like popcorn flying everywhere or whatever. Um, it's almost like you can take a step back. It's like, oh, I'm actually sitting in the theater. Do I even like this movie? Can I
Yeah.
get up and go outside, get some fresh air? Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It's really powerful, the thing, this, like she said, the stories that we tell ourselves and even the language that we use around our body can really influence how we see our body as
Mm.
well.
Um,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like I think the conclusion I've drawn in terms of like just generally how I feel about whether I personally would share images of a like Instagram versus reality, of a posed unposed, of, me slightly like bending my body in certain shapes to like what's the word? Kind of to exaggerate certain aspects of my body. I
Mm,
personally feel that I don't think I think there's enough of that out there, and I don't think people need me to do it. But I
mhm.
also think, for me, I think what has been one of the most powerful things is when people just turn up as themselves and do post the unpost photo, but don't have the Instagram thing before it, and
Yeah.
then don't even comment the on the supposed imperfections. So
Mm,
like I personally see that as the most powerful message to say that like, oh, here is a body, but like we're not even commenting on the body because, it's like you said, like the arc of that journey of like getting to the point where
mm,
recognizing that my body is probably the least interesting thing about me, and that actually I can just turn up how I want to turn up, and I can show up how I want to show up, and
yeah.
I don't need
And
to
I don't need to write
justify.
it about it.
Yes, I don't like. So the other day I posted a photo and I sweat. I'm a sweater, right? And I had this like extremely sweaty crotch in this photo because I've been on a spin
Yeah,
bike. And
yeah.
I thought, like, oh, I could post a photo and say, like, I'm sweaty and I've got a sweaty crotch. And I know from years of being on social media that that would be a really popular post, and people would be like, oh my goodness, thank you so much for normalizing this. And, I'd
Mm.
probably get loads of likes and loads of shares, and it would probably be great for my Instagram
Great
as
for
well.
engagement.
Great for engagement.
Yeah.
However, that wasn't really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about something else. And I felt like, well, I'm just going to use the image anyway. And I even contemplated, like, do I just put, like, P.S. I know I'm really sweaty? And I was like,
Yeah.
no, because, like, I actually, if I acknowledge it, then it is still like going, like, oh, you're not meant to be sweaty, rather than just saying, like, no,
Mm.
people are sweaty. And I don't need to comment on it. Like, I don't need to, it's not a big deal. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that was just like a little way of just kind of going, I don't need to justify why I am the way I am. I don't need to justify my body's
Mm.
existence because I'm supposedly breaking rules. And interestingly enough, not a single person has, I don't think, even commented or probably even noticed or said anything
Yeah.
about this sweaty
Yeah.
crotch.
Or they
Um,
think, congratulations, you're a human, you have a sweaty crotch, you were just on a spin bike.
yeah, no, everyone
Yeah.
like people were like interested in like actually what I had to say, and I think that's
Mm.
for me. That's just an example of like where I've kind of got to, and I think, as you said, I think you explained it really well. Like that arc of going like where I have been in that like I'm going to show off my body, because I think that's really important for that moment of my journey right now. But then
Yeah.
at the like, I don't know if it's the destination because I don't know if there is a destination, but that eventual thing of getting to like, yeah, this is my body, and it is the least interesting thing about me how I look, and I've actually got more to offer, and I want to share that with you. And I think, I don't know,
Yeah.
that's the kind of message I'm really drawn to right now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why I don't find that content helpful anymore, because I'm not in that headspace anymore. And I
Mm.
think that's where people, yeah, whereas I think if you're, like you said, maybe if you are brand new to the stuff, that content is the first step in a whole
Exactly.
process.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing that we will always need people who are at different points
Mm,
in the journey.
mm.
Still looking for another word
I
besides
know. Do you know what? Was it Sophie Hagen's book? And she called it a safari or something. And she's
a
like,
safari.
I can't think. And there was like a footnote in the book that was like, okay, everyone always says journey. So I'm just going to choose different words at different points in the book. And like one of them was safari. And I found that hilarious. I just thought it was
Yeah,
great.
yeah, so good. But yeah, we need people who, because there are people who are really fresh now and they need a voice who's normalizing that. And there will be people who have followed you for a while, have followed me for a while, who are at different points. And that's the thing, I think, um, at the end of the day, we need critique on what messaging we're putting out there. And also, another one of those dialectics is that we need content that is all along the bridge kind of thing. So I often talk about how, if you're coming straight out of diet culture, it's probably too much for you to talk about, fat phobia, and to go straight there and to talk about how you shouldn't center yourself in movements and all of these terms that you don't know. And some people might say that that's coddling people or dulling it down, but we know how humans work. We can't just jump. We can't, you can't expect a baby to be born and then immediately run a marathon and know how to use their legs. So we need people along the whole spectrum delivering particular messages.
I absolutely agree. And I have like a friend here in the UK who's a dietitian working in this space, like a Hayes dietitian. And we kind of talk about this a lot. Like we kind of say there's a scale of like 1 to 10, and like 1 maybe being like deep in diet culture and 10 being the most like a super radical body liberationist in all the kind of body politics of everything. And I think like and generally there's a lot of people like hovering around like the like 3, 4, 5 of like I'm in these diets, I don't know. I'm fed
Yeah.
up of disliking myself. I'm fed up of kind of like constantly going on the same process every couple of years and like not getting the results. And is there a way that like we can just hold a hand over and like pull them over to that like 5, 6, and then you point them in the direction of the people who are doing the more radical stuff, and like
Exactly.
I think there's, for me, this is a personal experience as well, and of yeah, it took me like even I remember like acknowledging what diet culture was a big deal for me.
Oh,
When I'd been so deep in diet culture at one point, to say that like there's this thing called diet culture, and it felt like really
mm,
scary and political to say that statement, and now it's like become my second language. um
yeah,
it's so, yeah, I think we really need to respect. And do you think maybe like be a bit more, have a bit more empathy, just to say like everyone is at different points and different moments on
yeah,
their journey?
yeah, yeah. I think we can hold that, and if it feels okay for people to hold that, they can. And I think it's also when we look at it from a social justice perspective that we're not trying to, especially if you're, let's say, at that 3, 4, 5, 6, when you are trying to learn things, it can be really hard to suddenly hear a voice over on 10, 11, 12,
Mm,
so to speak. And then people in that space start being like, oh, but could you just say it nicer or something like that? And that's totally valid. Sometimes from a psychological perspective, we do take things on board more readily when we don't feel like we're being attacked. But
mm,
then we also need to be mindful of, if we are talking to people who are at that more radical end, especially with lived experience, that we're not asking them to tone down
yes.
their anger and things like that, because they're also on a journey. And the thing is that people who are on 3 and 4 may get to 11, 12 and be super livid, and that's the thing. I don't want to generalize that end of the spectrum either, because I don't think everyone is angry at that
Mm,
end of the spectrum. But that's also a valid place to be.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think just really respecting that, yeah, and particularly when it comes to lived experience, like just respecting that lived experience, and you know
Mm,
just recognizing that, um yeah, like as we said, like things don't happen in a vacuum, and people don't form opinions, and people don't come with ideas and things because they're in a vacuum. And I think really
yeah,
important to just go like, you know there is stuff that we don't know, and like this is why people are
Mhm.
the way they are. This is why I have to say, this is why I've been such a fan of therapy, because it's really made me just be less more understanding of other people and of myself, but like just to go like, oh, everyone else has like a deep pile of shit behind them, and you know they're trying to
Totally.
do just the same thing, and we're all, you know, trying to do our best with what we know at the time. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think all of us could benefit from taking things a bit less personally,
Mm,
which is so hard. Me
mm.
as a Cancerian who takes things personally all the time. I think I'm talking to myself in that respect. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, where, it's like that saying, we're all fighting a battle that, or, that
No one
fighting the
can
battle,
see, isn't it?
everyone's fighting a battle you can't see or something like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Um, Now I wanted to chat about just kind of before we go, to chat
Mhm.
about the challenge you recently did on your Instagram page. And I'd love you to make, I'm going to probably totally mess it up. So I'd love you to explain your original post and the subsequent kind of photo challenge that came out of that. And
Yeah.
and how important it was for for your community to like release shame, and how
Mm,
shame is part of that body image journey.
mm, mm. Yeah, so recently, I think a few months ago, I spontaneously decided to find a picture of myself from when I think I was like 11 years old. And it was a picture that I had actually held a lot of shame around. And it probably wasn't until that moment where I felt ready to show that to the world. I thought, yes, this is something that I need to do. Um, and it was one of those photos that I thought, at the time, and even up until a few years ago, I thought, yeah, maybe not a few years ago, but for a big portion of my life, I thought, this can never be seen by anyone. Who is I look disgusting. I even remember having a moment early days with my partner thinking, he can never see these photos of me, like, I don't want him to ever see me like this, rah rah rah. And I thought, well, this is going to be a teachable moment. So I felt ready, and I sort of gathered up my little inner child within, and I thought, how about we just obliterate the shame monster and just put it out there? So for those of you who are familiar a little bit with Brene Brown's work, she talks about how shame thrives in secrecy. And one of the best things that you can do for shame is to talk about it. And shame does not like that. The shame monster is like, no, you must keep this a secret forever because you're a terrible person, rah, rah, rah. So I decided to post that photo to my 90,000 plus followers on the internet and write a little story about it. And I had a vulnerability hangover for a good day after I did that. Um, and in that post, towards the end, I thought, hey, how about I invite other people to share images like this, because I'm probably not the only one that has a pile of images that will never see the light of day. And I thought, how about we just make this like a bit of a tribute to those images? And I was flooded with DMs. Everyone had an image like that, and people were saying, as soon as I read that and saw your image, I knew exactly the image that was my version of that.
Mm.
And I think, I probably could have kept posting for days in the Instagram stories, but people had a chance to really, yeah, post the thing that post the photo that they felt most ashamed of, and through that, people were able to have this collective experience of releasing shame, because shame at the end of the day is a very lonely experience because it's so isolating, and we just blew it out of the water, and it was, yeah, it was incredible.
It's saved as a highlight on your Instagram page. So I'd really
Yeah.
recommend people to go and watch it. I found it really emotional to look through and to think about. And yeah, I think it's really a powerful representation. I felt like it almost was releasing the shame, but also reclaiming that
Mm,
photo to be like,
yeah.
that is a photo of me, and like, and whatever it was. And I also think it was a really good example of, I think, people holding a lot of shame around their bodies when maybe as an outsider you objectively look at it and think, why were you ashamed of your body?
Yeah,
What was the shame that you held here? And maybe not understanding it, but also realizing that like I felt like when you look through the post, like you had people of all different shapes and sizes with these photos.
exactly.
Everyone was affected by this. Everyone had that experience, and I felt like actually that's a really universal experience of
Yeah.
that body shame that we sadly do have.
Yeah. And some people recognized that they had those moments of like, they would tell me in DMs that I would look at this image of someone and think, what the heck? Like, how could they be ashamed of their body?
Mm,
Because perhaps in their mind, that was an ideal body.
mm,
And they then had this moment of, okay, how is it that, I can have compassion for other people's images that they find really shameful, but I can't with my own. And it actually opened up a space for them to be able to witness their own image as as okay, and that they're okay and with compassion instead of through that inner critic's lens. And I think that really speaks to how in general, there is a lot of pain around body image,
mm,
for all genders, but I think in particular for women or those who are very socialized as women, there's
mm.
so much pain there, and we haven't really been able to speak about it.
I know, and I hope this conversation, this kind of, I'm like just putting our ideas and thoughts out there. I really hope it helps kind of people with that journey. Maybe give them some tools. Like, are there? I think. Do you have advice on how people get started on this process of people listening and they're like, do you know what? I'm fed up of like feeling this way about myself. I want to start. I don't have a clue where to start, or like
Mm.
and then as a like add on to that question, because I get this question all the time and I'm not the expert, how do I find the right therapist for me?
Mm.
So
That's a big one.
yeah, so potentially like how do I get started on this journey, and if I'm looking for a therapist to help me with this work, how do I find that person?
Yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned before, the very, very first thing you can do is curate your feed, which means get rid of accounts, unfollow accounts that make you feel shitty about your body or feel bad about your body. And make sure you start following bodies of all different sizes and just sit with the feelings that come up when you see different body sizes. Don't place judgment on it, just notice, what's coming up for you. Let your brain do some of that background processing work just by being exposed to other things. And then if you want, I kind of unpack it a little bit, and I'll just like pop a plug in here. If you join my mailing list, I do have a little path to body image healing
Amazing.
um, little guide that gives you a bit of a rundown. Um, but yeah, I would think about even just having a think about, where do my body image issues come up for me? Is it mostly when I'm standing in front of the mirror? Is it when I'm around my partner? Is it all of the above? Just start beginning to understand what your body image issues look like. And then you might start noticing some patterns. From there, it might be something that you take that information and you take it to a therapist who works in this area, or and this goes into the second part of the question, how do you find a therapist? When you're looking for a therapist, you can actually ask them questions. Do you work with body image? Is that something you've done a lot of work around? How confident do you feel with it?
Mm,
What's your perspective on body size? Are you more weight centric? Things like that. So people forget that they can also interview their therapist, because you want to find someone that you think, it's almost like dating in a way.
yeah.
You want to know who you're working with. And the other point is that it's really quite normal to go through several therapists, and that can be really difficult. There are some unicorns out there where they find one therapist their first go and they've been in a long relationship with them, and then there are other, yeah, I actually got really lucky too. And there are other people who might have to, go through 5 or 6 different therapists to to find that right fit. But I think at the end of the day, if you're ready to do this work, just keep persevering. And that's the thing, there are so many resources on Instagram. If you join the community, there's so many words for it, you know, the body positive community, body acceptance, body image, the therapy kind of community on Instagram, you will start learning a lot about yourself. And a lot of creators have courses and books, and I think sometimes, and I think I might have touched on it in the guide that I created, is that you just need to follow your intuition, just those little calls of, yes, this feels right, I think I need to go here, or okay, this book looks really good, I'll read this book first and I'll just get some more information. That's definitely how I started my healing journey. I remember the catalyst for my healing journey was in a ridiculous how to stop emotional eating book, and it basically said, which I'm not going to tell you the name of, but it said something like that you basically need to talk about the things that are hidden within you, that you feel shame around, that you're not ready to talk about. And I remember sitting there and I had just, I was doing one of my behaviors and I thought, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need to go to therapy. I thought I didn't need therapy either. I was like, I'm fine, everything's great. And then I thought, no, it's time to go. So that's the other thing. You'll know when you're ready to go deeper in this work. It's what we spoke about at the start, how you might dip in a little bit. You might see a therapist for a month or two and you think, no, I'm not ready. That's okay. 5 years time, you might jump in again and start the ball rolling. So yeah, there's no one way.
And I think with therapy, and I think because I have these conversations with people in my DMs, and someone's like, "How do you know if you're ready?" And I think you know that you're ready, and also you go in with an open mind, thinking like, "I want to gain something from this," rather than this is something I have
Yeah,
to do. Because I think there's a potential that when you go in thinking like, "Oh, this is what I should be doing," you're not actually opening yourself up to the true kind of process, and like maybe getting
yeah,
getting as vulnerable with yourself as you need to, and therefore like not getting the most out of it that you possibly could because there's something holding you back. And I don't know whether you think that's something you can work on with a therapist, or
oh,
whether,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest fears around therapy for people is that they're going to go to therapy and the therapist is going to rip the band-aid off in the first session, and then you're just going to be left gaping and open and not know how to deal. If you're
Hmm.
working with a good therapist, it will be titrated, so it will be a gentle evolution, and it also depends on the type of therapist you're working with. If you're working with a more humanistic therapist, they will, you know, they'll work with you in that they'll be walking alongside of you, but they won't impose themselves too much on your process. They'll be a gentle guide. And then there are some therapies that are more, you know, this is how it needs to be done. Let's break through resistance, all of this stuff. And yeah, that's when you might need to go through a few different therapists. But yeah, ultimately people are afraid of going down with their pain. So they're afraid that if the box is open, the lid's open, that it's this giant void and you're going to get lost and just obliterated. It's almost like an existential fear of being annihilated, which is a lovely way to probably, you know, end
When,
this.
yeah. And I think, yeah, I mean, when I went to therapy, I was like, do you know what? I think I find it funny now, but this is like a year ago. I actually feel really good. So I feel like my life's pretty good right now. So I feel like now's the time that if I kind of knew there was stuff, but like if there is stuff, then I feel like, yeah, like let's do this. Like I didn't go in my like personally, I didn't go in at my rock bottom. I actually got through my rock
Mm.
bottom, and then I was like, so maybe I do need to like talk about some stuff, because maybe there is
Yeah.
some stuff I haven't dealt with, but I don't feel like there is right now in my life. But I'm curious as to like that there might be. And now
Mm.
being like pretty much 12 months in, I'm like, how was I so blind and naive to all this stuff that I've been carrying around with me for
Yeah.
years? And
Mm.
yeah, but I think it must be different for everyone, and there isn't like one right
Definitely.
or wrong way of doing it, and it's just
Yeah.
what's right for you, I suppose, at the time that you're ready for it.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
should also add, if you're looking for like a Hayes based therapist, a health at every size based therapist, am I right in saying that the best place to go is to go to there's a database, I believe, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, there is a database, I think depending on the country you're in, but I think even if you find yourself in the Instagram community, you can reach out to a Hayes therapist, even if they're not in the area, and say, hey, do you know anyone in this particular area? Because honestly, we all pretty much know each other to some extent and we're all connected. So if they're not on that database, we should be able to give you a pretty good recommendation.
And everyone's doing virtual therapy at the moment, so perhaps maybe location isn't such a huge issue right now because
Yeah.
you're able to
Yeah.
work with people maybe not necessarily like on your front door. Um,
Yeah.
awesome. So thank you so much, Ashlee, for having this
So,
conversation today. I think you've just been brilliant. Where can people find you? Um, how can we support you?
so I'm mostly on Instagram at bodyimage_therapist. You can find all of my links in my bio there. And I also want to do a sneaky plug. I have a book coming out in April of 2021. So that's combining art therapy and creative approaches to help you find acceptance in your body and
Well,
just general body image.
I would love to talk with you about that book, and because I felt like we did not get to chat about art therapy today. There's so much we could have spoken about, and I'd
Oh,
love
I
to talk
know.
about that with you.
Speak
So
forever.
we'll definitely have to do that. We'll definitely have to do that again.
Yeah.
Is do you know when it's going to be available for pre-orders? Do you know roughly a time?
I'd say it will be open probably in a 1 or 2 months or so, but if you follow me online, you'll definitely see that pre-order post go up. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm so excited for your work to be out there to like reach a even bigger audience.
Yeah.
Ashlee, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for listening. And if you did enjoy the podcast, make sure to use the hashtag Train Happy Podcast, tag at Train Happy Podcast, and tag myself and Ashlee because we would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. And I'll see you next week. Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.